At the opening of the chapel where my mother was cremated in March, my husband told 300 people that Immy was the one who understood the building. I taught Immy. I brought her into the practice myself, over his objection. The chapel opened on a Wednesday in November, which is a strange day to open anything, and it opened at 2 in the afternoon because that is when the light does what I spent 4 years making it do. Fenn Vale is a memorial chapel and crematorium on 11 acres outside a town of 19,000 people, and the brief was for a building that could hold 140 mourners and let them leave without walking back past the people arriving for the next service, which sounds like a small problem and is the entire problem, and I solved it with 2 doors and a wall and a change in level of 400 millimeters, and I have never in my life been prouder of anything. And in the March, 8 months before it opened, with the building still hoarded and the plant not commissioned, my mother died, and the local authority gave us a dispensation to use the chapel for 1 service before handover, because my mother had campaigned for that crematorium since 2011, and because the man who signs those things had known her since he was a boy. 41 people. My mother's coffin came in through the doors I drew, and went out through the ones I drew. And I sat in the 3rd row and watched the light come across the west wall at 2 in the afternoon in exactly the 4 bands I had designed it to make, and that is the last thing my mother and I did together, and I am not going to pretend to you that I designed it for that, because I did not. I designed it in 2019 for a client. So that is the room. That is the room in which, in the November, at the opening, my husband Hugo Rowe stood up on the level change I had specified and said, "I want to say something I have been trying to work out how to say for about a year." He said, "There is a difference between the person who draws a building and the person who understands what it is for." He said, "Somewhere in the 2nd year of this project, a young architect in our office started telling me what this building was actually about, and she was right, and she has gone on being right." And then he said, "Immy, stand up, love." And Immy Achterberg, 30 years old, in a gray coat, 4 rows back, stood up, and 300 people applauded her for about 11 seconds. And I stood at the back, with my hands at my sides, and I did the only thing I have ever known how to do instead of feeling, which is that I measured it. 400 millimeters. That is the height of the step he was standing on. I set it at 400 rather than the 150 a level change wants, because a mourner coming through those doors needs to be made to slow down, and 400 is where a person's body stops. He was standing on my grief break and thanking somebody else for the building. Quilliam Rowe was 2 people and a back bedroom. That is 2003, in a house in Trellick that we could not afford, with 2 drawing boards, one of them a door on trestles, and a printer that overheated. I was 29. Hugo was 31. We did loft conversions for 4 years, and then a barn that got into a magazine, and then 11 more like it, and in 2013 we did a bus station, of all things, and a bus station is where a small practice either dies or becomes the practice that gets asked about civic work, and we became the second. 22 years. And here is the division of that practice, which everybody in this county knew and which we never once wrote down, and I want you to sit with that, because the whole of what happened to me lives inside the fact that it was never written down. I do the design, Hugo does everything else. That is not a slight on him, and I will not have it read as one. Hugo Rowe can take a client through a difficult cost meeting so gracefully that they thank him for the bad news. He can price a job to the pound. He has never in 22 years drawn a building, and he does not have the eye, and he knew it and said so cheerfully in public for the first 12 of those years, and I loved him for it, and I married him in a register office in 2008 with the woman from the tile showroom downstairs as a witness. And what changed is not that he began wanting the eye. What changed is 2019, when Fenn Vale came in, 4.4 million of fee across 6 years, the whole practice. and a man who is very good at everything except the thing a building is judged on realized he was about to spend 6 years being publicly described as the other one. 5 things from the 22 years, because otherwise he is only a mechanism, and he was not only a mechanism. In 2006, we could not pay ourselves for 9 weeks, and he sold a lathe his father had left him, and I found out in 2014 from his mother at a christening. In 2011, my mother went at the crematorium campaign like a woman possessed and got herself thrown out of 2 council meetings, and Hugo drove her to the 3rd one and sat beside her in the public gallery in a suit so that she would look like a person with professional support. And he did that 4 times, and he never once told me he was doing it, and she told me in the hospice. He is funny about buildings in a way almost no architect is, and there is 9 minutes he used to do about the bus station's own bin store that I have laughed at in public on 3 separate occasions, and I laughed at it again about a year ago on my own in a car and then had to pull in. He learned at about 45 to sit in a room while I drew and not talk, which sounds like nothing, which took him 4 years, and which almost nobody's husband ever manages. And in 2018, when I had the thing with my hand and could not hold a pencil for 11 weeks, he cleared his diary and read the entire Reba plan of work out loud to me over 4 evenings so that I could keep working by dictating. And it is the single most boring act of love I have ever heard of, and I have never told anybody about it until now. That is the man. That is not a preamble to a monster, and I will not tell you it was building all along, because it was not. It was 19 good years and then a car journey, and if I could tell you the exact month it turned, I would, and I cannot, and that is the part that frightens me. I watched it start. It was in a car, coming back from a client presentation in Monmouth in the November of 2019. And the client had asked me a question and looked at me for the whole of the answer, all 4 minutes of it, and Hugo drove about 30 miles without saying anything and then said, "They think I do the money." And I said, "You do the money." And he said, "Yes." And that was the entire conversation, and I did not think about it again for 5 years, and I have thought about it every week since. I taught Immy Achterberg in her 5th year. I did 2 days a month at the school in Cardiff for 7 years, which architects of my generation do, which pays about nothing, and which is where you find out whether you can still think or whether you have become a person who repeats herself. And Immy was the best student who has ever sat in front of me, and I am not going to be modest about my ability to know that, because knowing it is the job. She had the eye. It is not teachable. About 1 in 140 of them has it, and she had it at 24, and it was completely undisciplined, and her drawings were unbuildable, and they were the only ones in the room I wanted to look at twice. And in the January of the 4th year of Fenn Vale, 11 months before Hugo stood on that step, I brought her into the practice. I want to be exact about how that happened, because it is the part I have had to hold. Hugo did not want her. He said we could not carry another salary against a fee we had already drawn down, which was true. He said she was too green to put on a live job at stage 4, which was also true. And I overrode him in our own office above the tile showroom, using the only piece of leverage I have used in 22 years, which is that I said the design would be better with her on it, and that the design is mine. And he gave way in about 4 seconds. And I remember thinking at the time that he must be tired. He gave way in 4 seconds because a young architect on that project was, from that moment, the answer to a problem he had been carrying since a car journey in 2019 and had never said out loud to anybody, and I handed her to him, and I did it over his stated objection so that it would be on the record that I had insisted, and she was wonderful. She did the west wall, which is the only element of that building that is entirely hers, and she did it in 7 weeks, and it is better than anything I would have done, and it is the reason the light comes across in 4 bands instead of 3, and it is the wall I was looking at in March with my mother's coffin 11 feet away from me. I have thought a great deal about why I overrode him that January, and the flattering answer is that I wanted the building to be better, and the flattering answer is about 60% true. The other 40 is that I was 50 and had not had a student in 5 years, and there is a thing that happens to a woman in a 2-person practice at 50 that nobody writes about, which is that you become extremely good and completely alone, and the last person who argued with you about a drawing did it in 2017. I wanted somebody in that room who would tell me I was wrong. Immy told me I was wrong in her second week about the level change, and she was wrong about the level change, and I did not care in the slightest. I went home elated and could not explain to my own husband why I was in a good mood, because explaining it would have meant saying out loud that I had been lonely at a drawing board for 5 years in a room with him in it. He worked that out before I did. I am almost certain of it, and I have never been able to decide whether that makes what he did worse or whether it makes it the single most attentive thing he did in the last 5 years of our marriage. I told her so. I told her in front of the client, and I told her in front of Hugo, and I put it in writing in her appraisal in the July, which is a document that later mattered a great deal, and which I did not write for that reason. I wrote the abatement letter in the June. A crematorium is not a chapel with a furnace behind it. It is a regulated industrial process, and the thing that makes it lawful is the abatement plant, which strips mercury from the flue gas, and mercury comes out of dental amalgam, and that is as much as I am going to say about the physical facts, because it is somebody's mother in that machine. The plant is expensive. On Fenn Vale it was £1.1 million of a £4.4 million job, and in the June of the 4th year the client's cost plan came back, needing £800,000 taken out, and the proposal on the table was to defer the abatement plant to a Phase 2 and operate under a temporary exemption on a lower throughput, which is a real mechanism and which is lawful, and which depends entirely on the throughput staying under the number. And I wrote to the client, copied to Hugo, to the mechanical engineer, and to the client's own estates director, and I said that the exemption was calculated on a throughput of 410 cremations a year, that the catchment analysis in the business case assumed 860, that those two numbers cannot both be right, and that I could not recommend deferral. 4 paragraphs, dated the 9th of June, on the practice's letterhead, in the project file, and the client deferred it anyway, which clients do, and Hugo agreed it in a meeting I was not at, which partners do, and I let it go, which is mine. Fenn Vale opened in the November and did 690 cremations in its first year, not 860, not 410. 690, which is over the exemption by 280, and which the operator knew by about the following August, and which means that from about the August of the first year that building has been operating outside the condition it was permitted under, and the question that then arrives, and it always arrives, is not whether anybody warned. Everybody always warned. The question is who held design responsibility at the moment the deferral was agreed, because design responsibility is a defined term in the appointment. It attaches to a named person, and it is the difference between a practice having a bad year and a practice not existing. The submission named one design lead. I found that out on the Monday after the opening, 5 days after the step, and I found it the way I find everything, which is by filing. The regional award submission had gone in on the 26th of September, 6 weeks before the opening, and I had not seen it, which is not unusual because Hugo does submissions and has since 2006, and the submission names the design lead, one name, and the name is his. That on its own is a thing I could have lived with for about a fortnight and then had a very cold conversation about. It is the attachments. A submission carries the project's stage reports because the Institute wants to see the design's development, and a stage report is issued at the end of each work stage, signed and dated, and it goes to the client, and it is the formal record of what the design was and who did it. There are 11 of them on Fenn Vale. I wrote all 11, and I issued all 11, and I have the issue sheets in a lever arch file in a room above a tile showroom. And 2 of them, stage 3 and stage 4, which are precisely the 2 that span the 9th of June, had been reissued in the August. Same reference numbers, same dates on the face of them, revision P2, which I did not issue. And the only difference between the version I sent out and the version in that submission is one line in the project team schedule on page 2, and the line reads, Design Team, H. Rowe, M. Quilliam, I. Achterberg. Her name is on 2 stage reports covering a period she was not employed for. She started in the January of the following year. She was in Rotterdam when stage 3 was issued, on a placement I wrote her reference for. And I sat in that office on a Monday morning with 2 versions of one document, and I understood the whole of it in about the time it takes to read a line. If the permit position at Fenn Vale becomes a claim, and it will, because 690 is not a number that goes away, then the design record says 3 people. One of them is a partner who does the money, and whom every client in this county would say does the money. One of them is me, with a 4-paragraph letter dated the 9th of June saying do not do it, and one of them is a 30-year-old on a salary who was in the Netherlands at the time, whose name is on the reports, who is not a partner, who has no equity and no insurance history and nothing whatsoever to lose except everything, and who would be, in any tribunal you care to imagine, the cheapest thing in the room. I checked it 4 ways before I said one word to anybody, because a woman who has just been humiliated in public and who then produces a document theory about her husband is a woman nobody listens to, and I knew that about myself before anybody had to explain it to me. First, the issue sheets, which are mine, and which record every document that has left that practice since 2003 with a date and a revision letter, and stage 3 left once on the 14th of March, revision P1. Second, the client's own receipt log, which I asked their project manager for in an email so boring that he sent it back in 9 minutes, and which shows stage 3 received in March and again in August under P2. Third, the file metadata, which I did not touch myself because I know exactly how that looks, and which our IT contractor pulled under a written instruction from me as a partner on a Tuesday, and which shows the document modified in August from Hugo's machine at 11:10 at night. And fourth, Immy's placement, Rotterdam, in the office diary in my own handwriting, 11 months before her name appears on a report covering that fortnight. 4 independent records, none of them stolen, every one of them mine to ask for as a partner of that practice, and all 4 obtained before I opened my mouth, because the moment I opened my mouth, I would stop being a partner, and every one of those doors would shut in the same afternoon. And then they tried to buy it in the December, and the offer is the most revealing document in this whole account. It did not come from Hugo. It came from Verity Loach, who has been our business manager since 2016, and who is the person nobody in this story would otherwise mention, on her own letterhead. And it proposed that I be recognized as consultant design director, that my name be retained in the practice title, that I receive a goodwill adjustment of £160,000 across 3 years, and that both parties agree the August reissue had been an administrative correction made in good faith. That last clause is the offer. Everything above it is wrapping. Nobody pays £160,000 to tidy up an administrative correction, and I sat at my kitchen table and did the arithmetic out loud to an empty room. They were pricing my silence against a permit exceedance on a regulated installation, and they had got the number about right. And if Hugo had come and said it to my face in the room above the tile showroom, in his own words, I do not know what I would have done. He sent the business manager. I did not answer the letter. There is nothing more insulting than not answering, and I learned that from him. When the letter did not work, they moved on the practice instead, and it took 9 days, and it was done properly, and it very nearly finished the whole thing. On the 11th of December, a partners' meeting was convened at 4 days' notice under a clause in our own partnership deed that neither of us had looked at since 2008. And the business at that meeting was a resolution to appoint a technical director with authority for design quality assurance across all live projects. And the person proposed was a consultant from a practice in Bristol, who is perfectly respectable and who had never seen a drawing of mine in his life. It is a 2-to-1 practice. I lost. And what a design quality assurance function does, if you have never had one, is that it countersigns every document that leaves the office, which meant that from the 1st of January, there would be no document in that practice issued under my hand alone, and by about the following autumn, the design record on Fenn Vale would show a technical director signing off the design and a design partner who had been, in the language of the resolution, supported. I said one thing in that meeting, and it is in the minutes because Verity Loach minutes everything, which turned out to be the single most useful habit anybody in that building had. I said, "Can we record that I asked whether this appointment is proposed in response to the Fenn Vale permit position, and that the answer was no?" And Hugo said no, on the record in a minute, in December, 3 weeks after his own business manager had offered me £160,000 to agree the August reissue was an administrative correction. That minute went into the tribunal bundle as document 41, and his counsel spent about 11 minutes on it, and did not improve it. Sylvie Rowe came to the house in the January, which is Hugo's sister, doing what Hugo's sister has done since 2008, and she is the emotional one, and she is very good, and she nearly had me. She did not defend him, which is the craft of it. She opened by saying he had behaved disgracefully, and that she had told him so. Then she cried. Then she said that their mother was in a home in Abergavenny, and that the fees were 1,100 a week, and that Hugo paid them, all of them, and had since 2021, and that if that practice went under, there was no version of the next 2 years in which that woman stayed in that home, which is true. I have seen the standing order, and then she said the thing that was aimed, and it was aimed with real skill, because she has watched me for 17 years. She said, "Marged, you have never once in your life needed anybody to say your name. That is the thing I have always admired about you. Everybody at that opening knew who designed that building. Everybody. And you are going to burn 22 years down because for one afternoon somebody did not say it out loud." And I sat in my own kitchen and could not answer her for a long moment, because it is a very good sentence, and because I have built an entire working life on not needing to be told, and because there is a version of me that had been asking the same question since the Monday. What I said in the end was, "Sylvie, did he tell you about the stage reports?" And she said, "What stage reports?" And that is the whole of that family in 4 words, and it took 11 seconds. And she went home and rang me 9 days later, having asked him, and what she said on the telephone was, "I am not going to be able to help you," which was, in its way, the most honest thing anybody in the Rowe family has ever said to me. Only the named design lead can withdraw a submission. That is the mechanism. It is 1 sentence in the Institute's entry rules, and it is the reason there is no scene in this story, and I know that is not what anybody wants. I did not go to the Institute with a complaint, because a complaint takes 3 years and produces a reprimand and a paragraph. I did not go to the county paper, and a stringer rang me twice in the December, having heard something at the opening, and I said I had no comment both times, and that is the hardest thing I did all year. And I did not stand up at the awards evening, which is what everybody assumes, and which I thought about for a fortnight, and then understood was the one move that could still lose it, because a woman standing up in a room claiming credit is making a claim, and credit is the only currency in this profession that cannot be proved and can only be conceded. So on the 9th of January, I did 2 things in one morning. I resigned as a partner of Quilliam Rowe in writing by hand with a reason stated in a single sentence. that 2-stage reports issued under my hand in the Fenn Vale design record had been reissued in August without my knowledge or authority to add a team member not employed by the practice at the time of issue. And I wrote to the Institute as the person named in the submission as design lead, withdrawing the submission. The entry rules require a withdrawal to state a reason, and they require the Institute to publish withdrawal notices in the regional bulletin, which goes to every practice in Wales and the West, about 1,100 of them, and which is read by exactly the 400 people whose opinion decides who is asked to do the next crematorium in this country. 19 words. Withdrawn by the named design lead, the design record submitted in support having been altered after issue without her authority. 19 words in a bulletin in March under a heading between a notice about a fee scale and an advertisement for roof lights. Here is what 19 words in the right place does, and it is worth setting out because it is the opposite of everything this genre normally sells you. Nobody rang me, not one person, not that week, not that month. What happened instead is that on the Tuesday, the chair of the regional jury rang the Institute to ask what altered after issue meant, because a jury cannot assess a submission it has been told was altered, and the Institute told him it meant what it said. And on the Thursday, the practice was asked by the awards office to confirm the design record in writing within 14 days. And a practice that has been asked to confirm a design record in writing has exactly 2 options, and both of them are the end, because you either confirm a record you know was reissued, which is a fresh act rather than an old one, or you do not confirm it, which answers the question. Hugo did not reply for 11 days, and then replied confirming the record as submitted. That reply is what he was reprimanded for, not the August. The August was a bad night and a bad man on a bad night, and the tribunal said as much. It was the 11 days in March, sober, with counsel available, in the full knowledge that his own design partner had resigned over it in January. And I would ask anybody who is being erased at work to notice the shape of that, because it repeats everywhere. They will survive what they did to you, and they will not survive being asked, in writing, to say it again. Thank you for listening to Channel Crystal Novel. And a resignation letter from a design partner is not a private document either. It goes to the bank under the facility. It goes to the client under the change of control provisions in the appointment. And it goes, the following January, into the practice's professional indemnity renewal, where question 9 asks who held design responsibility on each live project and whether it changed during the period, and it asks that under a duty of fair presentation, which means an evasive answer does not merely embarrass you, it voids the cover for the year, retrospectively, and every architect in Britain knows it. The Institute published the notice in March. The insurer declined to renew in the April, which is the sentence that ends an architecture practice, because you cannot practice without cover, and no other insurer will write you when the last one has walked. Quilliam Rowe stopped trading on the 30th of June, 22 years and 4 months, after a door on trestles in a back bedroom in Trelec. 9 staff, that is the number I carry, and it is worse than any other part of this, and 7 of them were placed inside 3 months, because I spent 3 months on the telephone doing nothing else, and 2 were not, and one of those 2 has left the profession and is a teaching assistant now, and says she is happier, and I do not entirely believe her. Hugo was referred to the architect's registration board by the insurer, which is a route almost nobody knows exists, and which is the only reason any of this had consequences at all. The tribunal found the reissue proved, found it dishonest, reprimanded him, and imposed a penalty order, and did not erase him, which I did not expect, and which I have decided is right. He practices. He is a consultant to a larger firm in Newport, doing exactly what he was always excellent at, which is clients and cost, and I hope he is content, and I do not think he is. Verity Loach, who first proposed in a fee protection meeting in the July that design responsibility on the project file be spread across the team, and who proposed it the way business managers do, as a housekeeping item in a meeting about something else, has never been sanctioned by anybody for anything, and has an office in Chepstow, and I see her car sometimes. The permit position at Fenn Vale was regularized in the second year by the local authority, which installed the abatement plant at a cost of £1.4 million, 300,000 more than in 2019, and the money came from a reserve that had been earmarked for a library refurbishment, and the library refurbishment has not happened and will not. And that is the actual bill for the 9th of June, and it was paid by a town of 19,000 people who have never heard of any of us. The Institute changed its entry rules the following year so that a submission must be accompanied by a declaration signed by every person named in the design record, which is one extra signature block, and which exists because of 19 words in a bulletin, and which 400 practices now grumble about annually without any idea why it is there. 2 insurers added a question about post-issue document revision to their renewal forms. The client's own estates director, who received the letter of the 9th of June and did nothing with it for 4 years, took early retirement in the second year with a settlement, and the local authorities' audit committee published a report on the deferral decision that names no individual and runs to 31 pages, and that I have read twice and could not finish a third time. And the mechanical engineer who was copied on that letter in 2019 and who wrote back the same afternoon agreeing with me and was ignored by everybody, including me, has since been asked to speak at 2 conferences about exemption thresholds and has never once mentioned Fenn Vale by name. The regulator issued an enforcement notice and no fine because the operator self-reported, which they did because the letter of the 9th of June was in their own file and their solicitor found it in about 4 minutes. Immy Achterberg gave evidence for a day and a half. She had not known. That is a finding. It is in the determination, and anybody who wants to think otherwise can read it. She had signed nothing, been told nothing, and found out that her name was on stage 3 when a lawyer put it in front of her in a room in Cardiff, and she was 30. And she had been sleeping with a partner in her first practice, and both of those things are true at once, and the second does not make the first her doing. She has not worked with him since. She wrote to me in the second year, and I did not answer for 5 months, and then I did, and we had lunch in Abergavenny, and it was not warm, and it was not cold, and at the end of it she asked whether any of the work had been real, and I said, "The west wall is yours. It will be there in 100 years, and it is the best thing in that building." And she cried in a restaurant, and I let her, and I did not put my hand out, and I am not sure to this day that was right. I have a room above a shop, not the tile showroom that closed. It is a barber's now, which everybody I trained with finds hilarious. A room, a board, a kettle, and me, and the practice is called Quilliam, and I do houses. I did a barn last year, and it is going in a magazine, which at 53 is either a circle closing or a joke at my expense, and I refuse to decide which. And I go to Fenn Vale 4 or 5 times a year, which is more than anybody thinks is healthy and fewer than I would like. I do not go to look at the building. There is a book of remembrance in the entrance, in a case, and it is turned to the day, and on page 4, on the 11th of March, there is my mother's name, and underneath it there is a line that my brother chose without consulting me, and that I would not have chosen, and that I have come to think is better than anything I would have written. And I stand there at about 2 in the afternoon, which is when the light comes across the west wall in 4 bands, and there are people arriving through the doors I drew, and people leaving through the other doors I drew, and none of them will ever meet, and not one of them knows that this took 4 years, or that somebody sat in a room above a tile showroom and worked out that 400 millimeters is where a body stops. That is the deal. You make it at 22 when you choose this instead of something with your name on the front, and it is a good deal, and I would make it again tomorrow. What I will not have, and what the whole of that year was actually about, is a man standing on the step I designed to slow a mourner down and telling 300 people that the deal was something else. So here is what I want to know from you, since you have been standing at the back of that chapel with me the whole way. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next.